Our first guest is Leo Broderick from the Council of Canadians, and he's here to talk about Pharmacare for all. It's something that's really, we've taken grasp of it. We have a petition online, and Leo's here to educate us further so we can bring this back home to show us how important it is in our next federal election. So this is something on the radar and has been for a while.
I'll just give a brief background on who I am. I'm a retired teacher. I live here in Charlottetown and am from Prince Edward Island. And I am the chair of the Council of Canadians, and it was really quite fortuitous that you're meeting here. And since I live here, when the invitation came, I decided to be the person that would talk to you about Pharmacare. And I think it's an extremely important topic, and it's a very timely one. But before I get into that, I want to say that welcome to Prince Edward Island, welcome to Charlottetown. I want to acknowledge that we are on unceded Mi'kmaq territory in this province. And I have been a past president of the Prince Edward Island Teachers Federation. That's some time ago, and have also been on the Canadian Teachers Federation as a vice president. And when I was the president of the Prince Edward Island Teachers Union in the mid-90s, we probably had the most vicious attack on public sector workers and workers in the province in anywhere in the country. At that particular time, the government of the day rolled all salaries back 7.5% and took away collective bargaining. And in order to get collective bargaining back, we had to threaten a strike, and we eventually had collective bargaining restored. So in the presentation this morning, I'm going to talk a little bit, before I get into Pharmacare, on the importance of unionization and the importance of unions in this country and around the world. I want to say that, as I begin, I think the three most critical issues facing Canadians and facing the world are these. One is climate change, and unless we get a handle on the issue, we are all in peril, and certainly the globe is definitely in trouble. Climate change is what I would call bringing about the biggest human disaster that we face, besides the whole environmental issue. We have, on a yearly basis, millions and millions of people who we're now calling environmental refugees. Because of global warming, climate change, they're being driven off their land. So climate change is critical. We need to address it in this country. We're not doing a very good job of it at the moment, but I do want to keep that in mind as we talk about the issues, even in terms of Pharmacare. The second critical issue connected to the first, but I think equally as important, is the rising inequality in this country and around the world. And I will address that just a little bit. Now, there's no question that the rising inequality in this country and globally is creating serious problems for people and certainly for the environment. And the third, connected to both of these, is the rising militarism in this country and around the world, and the militarization of our communities through increased, what I would call policing, that probably is unnecessary. But what we're seeing, of course, in the United States and in this country is the increased militarization of police forces, but also the increased production of arms in this country, which are being sold around the world. That's one area that we do not talk about a great deal in this country, but certainly if we look at the rising difficulties that people are having, it's clear that governments have decided to increase militarization to protect, I would say, the elites from many of the difficulties that are emerging as a result of climate change and rising inequality. One of the biggest difficulties that we're faced with, and we need to address this, and we're not doing a very good job, is the question of refugees in this country. And we need to recognize that we have to take many more. Many more because of climate change, and many more because of increased inequality. And we are going to see major difficulties around these issues. One of the things that the Council of Canadians has been very much involved in is the issue of water. The problem with a scarcity of water globally is not understood by very many people. But already there are wars being fought over who has access to the limited supply of fresh water. And I will talk briefly about that in a few minutes. So I want to say then as a begin that we at the Council of Canadians, our organization, about us just very briefly, we've been around since 1985, and we're probably the largest social action organization in the country. We have approximately 100,000 members, and we have about 70 chapters in 10 provinces and 2 territories. Our main focus is to deal with the issues of clean water, fair trade, green energy, public health care, and a vibrant democracy. We try to educate and empower people and to hold our governments and corporations accountable. So we're part also of a global movement, and we do not take any money from governments or corporations. It leaves us extremely free to be as critical as we possibly can. We consider ourselves a nonpartisan organization, but that does not mean that we can't criticize governments. And if governments do something half decent, then we can still praise. But as I mentioned in the introduction, I do think, and we believe this at the Council, that humanity is at a crossroads. We've seen the impact of economic globalization. We've seen the impact of unregulated market capitalism, and we've seen how these have divided the world into the rich and poor. At no time in living history has the planet been endangered. The question of whether it can sustain life well into the future is still not resolved. If we don't address the climate change issue, there are serious difficulties. We find that most governments support an economic system that puts unlimited growth above the vital needs of people and the planet. As I mentioned, we're part of a global movement, a global civil society to drive transformative change in the absence of true leadership by governments. We only have to look in this country and look to the south and look to other countries to realize that we are in a new era of right-wing populism. Look at the people who are being elected in the various countries. Even the past 3 weeks, we have seen some major changes. All of you know Donald Trump, and you know what his politics of hate and division. It's how he operates. And many other leaders are using the same approach. And I would say that in this country, we're now facing it as well, with a number of people who have been elected as premiers or leaders of political parties who could very well be on the verge of forming the next Canadian government. If we're not careful, we're going to see that. And I will say that workers will be attacked more than ever. I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of unionization. But if you look to the south, we will see that even though the unionization movement is strong in some sectors, there is a decline in union membership. It's deliberate. And the latest move by the Supreme Court, which said in June that employers, I think this is what it said, would not have to submit union dues or collect union dues, is meeting with great resistance, but it is a problem for the unions in the United States. That'll be coming to Canada soon. Beware of the leaders who talk about the value of unions, and unless they're clear that they see unions as being part of a democratic movement, then they're not to be trusted. So what we try to do is to fight to protect the commons. We try to get the idea out there that we need a vibrant, living democracy. So we're seeing in this country, I think we're seeing it at least, that democracy has been under attack. We saw it with the kind of tactics that took place not that many years ago with robocalls and trying to have people disenfranchised from voting. So it's one area that we continue to monitor, and we do have a democracy campaign. Our major work is with respect to trade, and I'm so pleased that you have Scott Sinclair, who is going to talk to you about trade and the implications of what happened in terms of Canada signing not the NAFTA, but it's called something else. He will be up to date on that. Water is a major campaign of ours. It's still shocking that we find in this country, to this very day, that there are over 100 Indigenous communities with boil water orders. We supposedly have the largest fresh water in the world, but in many places in this country, our water has been contaminated. And so as we debate the issue of pipelines and all of that, we know that Canadians from coast to coast to coast consider access to fresh water to be probably the most fundamental human right that we have. And we do know that a fight did take place, and it was recognized that the right to fresh drinking water is indeed a human right. But in this country, there are many, many places and many people who do not have easy access to fresh, clean drinking water. In this province, we are engaged in a major, what I would call a major controversy with the agricultural production. We're a monoculture system. We produce primarily potatoes for export, and potatoes require a great deal of water. And so the debate has been over the last few years that many farmers want access to deep water wells for irrigation. And about 12 years ago, a moratorium was placed on deep water wells. But we have one of the biggest corporations in Canada, if not North America, in the province, the Irving Corporation, and they control pretty much the potato processing potatoes for French fries. And they're advocating and wanting their suppliers, their producers, to all have access to deep water wells. We call them high capacity. we're very threatened that our drinking water, which comes only from one source, comes from the ground, is threatened in the province. So at the moment, having just passed the first Water Act in the history of the province, we are now faced with the possibility that the government will announce the lifting of the moratorium. We're fighting hard to ensure that that does not happen. With climate change and the latest UN report, they are advocating that industrial agriculture cannot continue anywhere on the planet. And in this province, we are committed to an industrial model of agriculture, which is a monoculture of potato production. We're trying to insist to government that we need to transition away from potato production entirely. Healthcare, which I'll get into shortly, we have taken on the issue of Pharmacare as our major thrust. And energy climate, we're very involved in those campaigns as well. I want to then begin, or just give you a little flavor of what Prince Edward Island has in terms of what its workers receive in average wages per week. We are the lowest paid workers in the country. We are consistently $250 lower than the national average. And if you look at this chart right here, the latest, our weekly earnings, is $832.41. That's what our workers receive on average. It's disgraceful. Our government is interested in having many islanders who moved away for employment, whether it be Ontario, British Columbia, Alberta. These have been traditionally the areas where we've gone for employment. They want to bring them back. But everyone says, why bring them back when all they will get in terms of an average weekly pay is $832. It's a major issue. Also, I would say another indicator of the difficulty that islanders endure is the question of food insecurity. Food insecurity has become a major issue in this country. It's a major issue here in Prince Edward Island. And the percentage of food insecurity for Prince Edward Island is about 18%. Some say 25%. That means, and you can see the other provinces, that means many of our children go to school without much to eat. And one of the things that has happened, we have not been able to provide or even when it's demanded, receive a breakfast program or a food program in schools that's provided by government. There's a little bit of it, but it's all through charity. It's a charity model. We need another system to ensure that people have access not only to clean drinking water, but to enough food. So food insecurity is a major issue in the province, as well as the country. I strongly believe in the union movement. There's no question that the union movement in this country and elsewhere has provided the kind of democracy and the standard of living and workplace safety. Unions have brought that to the country. Unions are absolutely essential for a vibrant democracy. I think that we need to increase our efforts in this particular age to have more unionization, to have many more workers be able to come into a union and in the workplace bargain collectively. People are saying with the new economy, and they say this about young people, although I'm not sure that I fully agree, that there is no interest in unionization. But I do think if unions undertake very popular education programs, we can connect with many more workers and bring workers into the union movement. Absolutely essential in a workplace. If you're going to have workplace safety, an opportunity to resolve issues that are fair and democratic, all of that works best with the union and through the union movement. And if you look at the density, the unionization, the countries with the greatest density are those countries that have higher wages, more workplace satisfaction. And we look in this country, we see Newfoundland has 36.1. Prince Edward Island is down at 29. Most of that 29% is from the public sector. This includes the public sector. Public sector unions are, in all provinces, are fairly high. But it's in the private sector where the real effort and the real drive to create more, what I would space for unionized workers. And I will say as well that in this province, in the 90s when the unions were attacked and for about 6 months collective bargaining was taken away, the intent there was to simply destroy the public sector unions. But the public sector unions at that time rallied together. And we fought back, and we fought back hard. So we have collective bargaining restored, but it's still been very weak. Because once you're attacked, it takes a while to recover. So across the globe, at least in terms of these countries, I mean, and this includes the private and the public. Now, Iceland's a very small country. I don't know if any of you have visited it, but it's a highly democratic society, although it's not without its difficulties. But 91.8%. Canada's at 26.5%. And Mexico, which is part of the trade agreement, they're in serious difficulty. The union movement is in serious difficulty in Mexico. The union movement in the United States, it's at 10.6, and that includes the public sector teachers. And the public sector unions in the United States are responding. The nurses' unions, the teachers' unions, it's where the life of the union movement is coming in the United States. But there is every attempt from almost every right-wing politician, and there are far too many of them in the United States, even some from the Democratic Party, who are out to get the unions. I like to say, although I'm not sure if this is completely accurate, but I think it's what we need to tell people. Union employees make an average of more than 30% than the non-unionized. 92% of union workers have job-related health coverage versus 68% for the non-union workers. And union workers are more than likely than not to have pensions. Now, even with the pensions, In this province, of course, with the public sector, there's been a major battle, and some of the unions have lost in terms of the kind of pension. And we have, at least when I retired, ours was guaranteed. It didn't depend on the market. But, and I forget what you call these two types of pensions, but they're going for the one that is the least advantageous to the worker. So this is why I think it's absolutely marvelous that you, as unionized workers, are here in Charlottetown to, what I hope, and I know you're doing, is to promote the union movement. You never just work in the union movement for yourself. But I've found that the benefits that unions bring to the workplace and to their communities is spread to the community. That's the value of the union movement historically. And I think even today it's far, far more important than ever that we continue with the unionization. I wanted to talk here just briefly because this is a shocking statistic. Now, I know the gap between women and men's wages in this country is narrowing, but this is the global situation. You can see 6 to 11, 11 to 21. From 2006 to 2015, women's wages are not keeping up globally with men. Now, we might argue that even men's wages are not good enough, and it's probably true, but why is this happening? It should be the reverse. And this is where I think the significance and the importance of the union movement. And unions have been addressing this, and it needs to be continued. Women workers find themselves often at the bottom of the heap. Across the world, women consistently earn less than men and are usually the lowest paid and least secure forms of work. By comparison, 9 out of 10 billionaires, and I'm going to deal with this issue of inequality, are men. Oxfam has spoken to women across the world, this is the most recent report, whose lives are blighted by inequality. Women in Vietnamese garment factories who work far from home for poverty pay and don't get to see their children for months at a time. Women working, and this is true, women working in the U.S. poultry industry who are forced to wear nappies because they are denied toilet breaks. This is the United States. This is shocking. But I know here in Prince Edward Island, I was shocked to learn that in a fish plant, where men and women, if they needed to use the washroom, would go and use it, take a minute or two, without having to put your pay stub, or whatever you call it, into the time, and they clock to see how long you're off on break. It's a non-unionized workplace. Terrible abuse. These are the kinds of things that take place in a non-unionized work environment. Another interesting statistic, 82% of the wealth generated last year around the world went to the richest 1% of the global population, while the 3.7 billion people who make up the poorest half of the world saw no increase in their wealth. And this is the latest Oxfam study. But it's not a sign of a thriving economy, but a symptom of a failing economic system. The people who make our clothes, assemble our phones, and grow our food are being exploited to ensure a steady supply of cheap goods and swell the profits of corporations and billionaire investors. That's the situation. And so I move to the issue of pharmacare, which is certainly related to the issue of inequality. We know that, and this is outlined in your petition, because your petition that you have on pharmacare is an excellent one, and you have thousands of people signing, and it's one of a number of petitions that various groups have put online. And the more we can get people to sign the petition for pharmacare, the better. I'm not overly optimistic or hopeful that we're going to achieve a national pharmacare program, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue, and we must continue to put the public pressure on government to do that. But the situation today is that it's really a patchwork of private and public insurance programs. About 26 million Canadians have private drug benefits, largely through employers. There are 102 public drug insurance programs across the country, but that still leaves 700,000 people with no drug coverage and an estimated 3.6 million with inadequate coverage. And that's according to the parliamentary officer, the budget officer. It's a serious situation. So without a universal prescription plan, coverage in Canada vastly differs depending on where you live. And I wanted to just center in here, since you are in the Maritimes or the Atlantic region, and here in Prince Edward Island. Regionally, Atlantic Canada has among the lowest rates of access to prescription medications in the country. In PEI, even publicly funded programs require dispensing fees or co-payments, which have proven to reduce access. They're very high, and they vary from pharmacy to pharmacy. And this statistic, 26% of Atlantic Canadians, I mean there is a national one as well, I'll get to that, don't take their medications as prescribed because they can't afford to. This is the inequality issue. So access to pharmacare, to drugs that you require, falls under what I would call a human right issue. Now, public spending in Prince Edward Island covers less than half the cost of prescription medicine. Of the 73,200 in the province working either full or part-time, an estimated 1 in 3, approximately 25,000, don't have health care benefits. And we know what the consequences. In the long run, it's costing the system many more dollars. In Canada, only about 27% of part-time workers have prescription drug coverage. That means in 2015, about 3/4 of PEI's 12,400 part-time workers didn't have prescription drug coverage. They're working, but their workplace doesn't provide any kind of drug insurance. And there is a seniors drug program here in Prince Edward Island, and covers residents over the age of 65. However, there are still 2 dispensing fees of $8.25 and $7.69 on needed prescriptions. The generic drug program is also available to senior residents, but requires out-of-pocket payments of up to $20. It's a serious situation. And the most recent trade discussions between the United States and Canada, Scott will be able to fill you in. I'm not sure how that's going to affect our drug cost in this country, or even the possibility of getting a national pharmacare program. Because when the United States was negotiating with Australia, it was one of the areas, drug coverage, because the pharmaceutical companies were going to lose out, and the pressure was put on the Australian government by the American government that would not be part of the deal. But the Australian government persisted and won the day. But no, just exactly where Canada is, well, I'm not sure. But the generic or the patent has been extended. because we have two trade agreements. We have the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Mexico, United States, and Canada, all dealing with patents. And then we had the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement with Europe, which at the very moment in Italy, there is some hope, but I don't think it'll last, that it won't sign. So CETA could die, but I don't expect that it will. So the Family Health Drug Program, tailored for low-income families, we have that in the province here, doesn't cover the cost of dispensing fees. Even charges as low as $2 have been found to be a barrier for some in the province for taking medication as prescribed. So for the island, this patchwork leaves many people without access to the medication they need, either because they don't have a prescription drug plan or have plans that don't cover the cost. So there's no question everyone should have equal access to prescription drugs they need, regardless of where they live. It's time, really, for a universal drug program. So this is a national statistic. Nearly 25% households include someone who is not taking their prescription medicines as prescribed because of cost. 1 in 4 households. Approximately 8.4 million people living in Canada, self-employed and in paid employment, do not have employer-based health benefits. And 1 in 10 patients cannot afford to take their prescribed medicines at all, 1 in 10. Research by the Canadian Federation of the Nurses Unions body count suggests that about 1,000 patients die each year from just 2 health conditions, diabetes and because of the prohibitive cost of prescription drugs. That's fairly significant, which really points out why we need a national Pharmacare. Now, this is just some information. I won't spend much time on it, but Canada's per capita prescription drug prices are the 3rd highest in the world, behind only the United States and Switzerland. Now, Switzerland is a very interesting situation, but it's not a model that we need to follow. So, there is, if there were a national Pharmacare, it's estimated would save between $9 and $10 billion a year. It's very significant. I think you have that on your site as well. But here's our opposition. Just last year, for the first time, Canadians were given a glimpse at the millions of dollars doctors receive from pharmaceutical companies each year. 10 of Canada's largest drug companies voluntarily released information about how much money they gave physicians, posting the disclosures to their website. And it's in the millions. Holidays, dinners, all kinds of extras that family doctors. And how many of you have gone into your doctor's office and on the way in or out, you were met by a pharmaceutical salesperson? The pharmaceutical lobby, next to the military lobby, is probably the largest in the country. It's extremely, extremely powerful. And so these are the companies. And so at the heart of it is in the United States, of course. And the irony in all of this is that all of the research into drugs, it's all paid for by American tax dollars. But the companies receive the benefits. In truth, the pharmaceutical industry in the United States is largely socialized, especially upstream in the drug development process, when basic research cuts the first pathways to medical breakthroughs. Of the 210 medicines approved for market by the Food and Drug Administration between 2010 and 2016, every one originated in research conducted in government laboratories or in university labs funded in large part by the National Institutes of Health. Since 1938, the government has spent more than $1 trillion on biomedical research, and at least since the 1980s, a growing proportion of the primary beneficiaries have been industry executives and major shareholders. Between 2006 and 2015, these two groups received 99% of the profits, totaling more than $500 billion, generated by 18 of the largest drug companies. This is not a business functioning in some imaginary free market. It's a system built by and for Wall Street, resting on a foundation of $33 billion in annual taxpayer-funded research. So I don't think we should have to worry about protecting the pharmaceutical companies. Now we know when the financial collapse came in 2008, 2009, the very same situation happened in the United States it did in Canada. Governments rushed to put in taxpayers' dollars to bail them out. And what should have happened, they should have been allowed to fail. And since then, we see what happened in terms of the banking institutions. We're right back where we were. This industry is highly, highly subsidized. It's the same as oil industry in this country, highly subsidized, billions. So in an industry where active ingredients are often bulk purchased for pennies and sold in milligrams for dollars, the patent is more than just the product. It is a license to print money, and an awful lot of money. And that's why in trade agreements, they push the extension of the patents, saying that they need that money to do the research, when in actual fact, it's tax dollars in the first place. Now, if we had a universal Pharmacare, not, with private insurance, it would give Canada an economic advantage. Canadian companies spend about $200 million per week on prescription drugs in costs incurred by employer drug plans. The overhead expenses for private health insurers are 10 times greater than the public system. We don't need the private insurers. Chronic drug spending is going to drastically increase. It's predicted in the next few years. In 2016, Canadians filled more than 600 million prescriptions at a cost of more than $30 billion. Canadian drug expenditures overall increased by 184% between 2000 and 2012. And 23% of Canadian families, nearly 1 in 4, failed to take needed medication due to costs. Hence the inequality. The average cost of providing private plans benefits for employees is now $8,330 per full-time employee. Currently, at least 30% of private plans now have maximums on drug coverage, and decisions about medications, what medications people have access to, should not depend on negotiations between employers and unions. Now, unions have been able to get this benefit for their members, but what people say in terms of those who are advocating for that, it has to be for everyone. So very quickly, a universal Pharmacare program could lower total spending on prescription drugs by approximately 30%, huge saving. And poll after poll, and this was done by the Nurses Union and the Council of Canadians, 91% of Canadians support a universal Pharmacare program. The public is behind it. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on Quebec because, look, Quebec is not a model for a universal Pharmacare program. You can do your own research on it, but Quebec currently has a hybrid private-public drug plan, which corporate lobbyists, think tanks, and insurance industry often tout as the way drug coverage should be provided in Canada. And we would say, don't follow this plan. I'll move right along. Here are the principles that your union and all unions across the country and many organizations have agreed to. These are the 5 fundamental principles. Universality, much like what we have in terms of Medicare. Coverage for all residents on equal terms and conditions. No more patchwork. 2, public single-payer administration. A publicly administered and delivered program that is integrated with the Medicare systems in which it operates. Directly accountable to the public it serves and leverages single-payer procurement to maximize purchasing power for the entire Canadian population. Accessibility, access to covered medications without financial barriers or other impediments. 4, comprehensiveness, coverage for as many medications as judged safe, and so on. And we know now, for example, that here in Prince Edward Island, there's a drug that some people take. I forget the name of it, but it's about $8,500. That's what the person pays. And if it's in Saskatchewan, it's probably $4,000, and if it's in another province, it's $2,000, and if it's in still another province, it might be cost nothing. So that's the inequality. And the final one is portable coverage, so that continuous and consistent coverage for residents who move within Canada. You know, in Canada, we've had public hospital insurance since 1957. When I was born, 1945, there was no such thing. I was born at home. There was no coverage. Public insurance for physicians came in 1966, and it was a battle. We know in Saskatchewan, where Tommy Douglas introduced it, and the doctors revolted, but he persisted, and we have public insurance. But really, since then, there has not been a large-scale national health initiative since. So, it's time. The time has come to do what Tommy Douglas had envisioned in the first place, which was not just hospital, doctor care, but also he had hoped it would be drugs. But the single biggest impediment to pharmacare is the unwillingness of federal, provincial, and territorial governments to absorb those costs and then increase taxes to pay the bill. And I'm not sure if we have to increase taxes, but some people are saying that, even if the consumer comes out paying less in the long run. In conclusion, the voice of the public, labor, and business must come together for universal pharmacare. And I think the one in the middle there, labor, is critical. It has shown the way in the past, and I think it can show the way in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Leo. Is there any questions for Leo? Tom.
Leo, I gather since you're putting out this information, that anybody putting it out under attack from the pharmacare industry?
I would say yes. The one good thing that's happening right now is when the federal government announced that it was going to do a study, and as Dr. Hoskins is moving from province to province. I didn't get to attend the session here in Prince Edward Island, but he did have a, I think it was on by invitation, but the pharmaceutical industry was there and pushing back hard. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they're fighting it, and the difficulty, I think, in terms of it's the provinces are going to get a handle on how they're going to handle this issue as well, and they're fighting with the federal government. But I think all of those kinds of problems should be easily resolved. I mean, it's Canadians are saying, 91%, we want a national pharmacare program. We have it for our hospitals, we have it for our doctors' insurance. It's a natural ending to say, well, we need drug care, pharmacare. I mean, we're one of the few industrialized countries that have a national Medicare program that doesn't have pharmacare. And it should have been done many, many years ago. And I think it will happen, but there are some major problems. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm curious why the pharma companies are pushing back so hard since the profits are pretty much still guaranteed. Why would they be wanting to push?
Well, their profits, the bulk purchasing, the costs to them may not be able to charge what they're charging now. It would be cut back if it's in the public sector. I mean, they put up the price of drugs there. There was one there not too long ago. It was badly needed, and so let's say you get it for $50, they put it up to $300, $400, $500. So, it would assume that they'd still make profit, but I'd say their profits would be curtailed. Yep.
Just on that point, I think the one that I've heard about most is people go out to buy events. Mm-hmm. Those have been.
Oh yes, yep.
Crazy. You've talked a little bit about what aren't good models. Look at like the Quebec model or Switzerland. Do you have any recommendations of good models?
Australia. Yep. Just check out Australia's model. I think it has huge potential. Switzerland certainly isn't a good model. I'd say the UK has a model that you could research and put forth. But Australia has a national pharmacare program. The United Kingdom, other Nordic countries have as well. So it's not impossible. It has been done before, and we should be able to do it in this country. It might be initially, but here's the thing about taxes. And Scheer's ad. Have you seen the Conservative leader's ad? Well, he's out. He's saying he wants you to take more money home, which means he's wants to cut taxes, but he's also going to attack workers. Paying taxes have become supposedly a dirty thing, but we need people to say that we want to pay a fair tax. We need fair taxes. Look at the breaks that for the wealthy people in this country. Look at the tax breaks they get. We need to close those holes. We can, we need to tax more. Certain people need to be taxed a great deal more. And people who have incomes should be happy to pay taxes to provide the public services that we require. But if you believe in privatization, if you believe in deregulation, and you think you have, the money to provide all of this, then you really would be saying, well, I don't want to pay any taxes. But that's not the way it is. And we need political parties and political leaders to once again be brave enough to say, we need to increase taxes. Not a regressive taxes like on things that are absolutely necessary, like the GST or the harmonized tax, the HST, on income, on wealth. That's where we need to put our taxes. Because if you increase, they were saying, well, 2% for the harmonized sales tax. Well, that's not a fair tax. That's going to hurt the people who have very little at the moment. They need the necessary things to live. They're going to pay another tax on it. Meanwhile, the very wealthy, the 1% or the 10%, the top 10, pay disproportionately much less. So paying taxes shouldn't become a dirty word. And demanding a Pharmacare program to provide equality right across the country, regardless of where you live, should be a good thing. And it has to be. But the political will is not there, but it only comes if public puts the pressure. And it is in the hands of people that eventually determine.
Usually parties look at numbers.
Yep.
And every number I've seen is 90%.
Yep.
So is there no political party out there that has got this on their agenda? Why are they so scared?
Yeah, well, I think of course, the New Democratic Party has always stood for a national Pharmacare program. And the Liberals promised it a couple of elections, but have not followed through. And even with this announcement, some time ago, when Morneau made the announcement we were going to have it, and then a week later, oh no, there are a number of problems with it. It's only going to be for a select few. But the study that's being done now might produce a report that says, yep, it can work and it will work. But if you receive a healthcare drug coverage and you've bargained for it and you've fought for it within your union, then it's time for us to publicly say and to move into our communities and saying what we have as a union member in terms of our benefits that we fought for, bargained for, and won through collective bargaining. This is what every member of this community should have. I think there's where the union membership can do something. It's not just that you have it now, but you want it to be universal. And it's not just it's not fair and it's not equitable that only certain people in a community have drug coverage, full and complete. But even with the drug programs that some employers have given to their employees and in some unions have negotiated, there still needs to be improvement. But I think where the union membership can really do a service to communities, to everyone in the community, is to have that campaign for Pharmacare for all. And the union membership can lead it. If we look at the history of the union movement in this country, and I think we forget a lot sometimes, of what the union leadership or the union movement in this country where it has come from, what it has done, what it has won. And that's where I think you can do a great deal of service to your community, wherever you are. Hook up with health coalitions, join other groups, other unions that are promoting this, because I know many unions have taken on the issue of a national Pharmacare program, and it will be due in part, primarily a great part, that if we do achieve it, it will be because labor in this country has seen the need for it. So, and I think also we need to hear the stories from people in our communities who are suffering because they can't afford drug therapy, drug coverage, and the astronomical amount of dollars that some people have to endure and pay for drugs that they're needed for them to be kept alive. And I wouldn't mind, hearing from you just a few stories about what's the impact of not having drug coverage. Go ahead.
A lot of seniors would like to work to make extra money for whatever, but the moment they work, they lose the drug card. So it's a situation that needs to be addressed. And Pharmacare for Canada to have Medicare and social transfers that are supposed to make a level of service in each province And then you have the hypocrisy of no pharmacare. It's just, it's hard to figure it out. It's hard to compute it.
For us, myself, Paul, Chris, we're trustees. We administer our own benefit plan. We get a contribution from the employers, but it's run by the union, right? And, as trustees, we're often confronted with, we have a set of rules, and, we decided a long time ago that all ties go to the members, right? And with all the new biological drugs, and, even with the trade agreement that the US and Mexico signed here last week, they extended the patent provisions, from 30 to 40 years, right? Which is just gouging regular people. I mean, generic drugs are way cheaper than name brand. I mean, if you go to Shoppers Drug Mart, 20 amoxicillin pills, name brand, are $30, 20 generic are $10, right? And we've had, 5 or 6 members use over $100,000 worth of drugs a year, with the new biological drugs and stuff like that. And I think as a trustee, our plan, we're in a financial position that we can afford to cover those things and all that, right? But just imagine if we couldn't. I mean, we're a group of construction workers, right? Financing and, coverage that should be provided by the government of Canada. I mean, you look at how wealthy this country is and what's been taken out of this country and continues to be taken out. And we, like I said, we've never been in a situation where we had to choose, whether some poor bastard lives or dies because we can't afford the coverage, but maybe someday we will, right? And like I said, this is a benefit that should be covered by our taxes. So, so you're fighting a good fight, Leo. Your presentation pissed me off, which is a good thing. And thank you.
Well, these are very important comments. With respect to health issues, drug coverage is far, far worse. It's deplorable. And so, as I mentioned in terms of drinking water, I mean, that's just the most obvious statistic that if that's a problem in First Nation communities where they haven't had safe drinking water for years, you can imagine the health situation. So drug coverage, I don't have, up to date or the statistics, but I would say that it's in very bad shape. But I think your point is that, you, through your union, are able to access these kinds of drugs, but 25% of Canadians don't. So it's a fairness issue. And that's where I think, union people who fought for these basic rights have a responsibility now to move outside the union and campaign hard to win a national pharmacare program. And I think the unions are positioned perfectly to do this. There are some more questions. I know the guest speaker has arrived. Yes, go ahead.
And so she also makes the choice of, do I eat this month, or you have to get the medication as your child, but none of that is covered, and it's just quite sad.
You live where?
Nova Scotia. So, single mom. She's not working anymore because she spends most of her life in the IWK with her daughter. So it's she takes a lot of donations and everything like that. But these are things that I never even thought about. That you have to pay for your chemotherapy for your child. Wow. You know, where does it come from? It's terrible.
It's unbelievable.
And she's probably just one of thousands of people in the same situation.
Absolutely. It's a powerful story, and that needs to be told.
Just one more there. So everybody's heard of the Walkerton water crisis and that. So there was a number of people in our community. There was fatalities and a number of people that were poisoned, let's say, for lack of a better term. And we have a member, and he had drank that day or whenever the water was contaminated. Basically, his kidneys and started to go right away, and stomach problems. Of course, everybody hears, you know, the government come in and you know, put funds in, and everybody's going to be looked after. Well, that was if you followed what they said medication you could take to fix it. This gentleman, it just kept putting him back in the hospital, so he had to go to natural drugs, which allowed him to function before they took his kidneys. And that, but he could not. And when they kept forcing him back onto this other stuff, he'd go in the hospital for 2 weeks again. And so the people that were able to use what the government funded for that were able to stay on. The people that didn't, they filed a class action lawsuit and lost. And that, so this gentleman, our plan, we have it where people can come with extraordinary measures and ask for help, and we can give them money outside of what the plan is. This guy's so proud and his view that the government should be paying for his, and he's about $800 a month out of pocket from the Walkerton water crisis.
Well, we have a campaigner on healthcare, although not at the moment. And then we have our information disseminated across the country through our chapters, who they numbers of maybe 70. Some are more active than others. And we give them the information, and then they go in their communities and meet with different people and groups and so on. We work closely with the Canadian Health Coalition and then the provincial coalitions. This has been a priority for the Canadian Health Coalition in terms of campaigning for a national pharmacare. We work closely with the Nurses Union, and it's been a priority with nurses unions across the country, and many other organizations, unions like yours, that we work closely with. So it's a combined effort by many groups, and the political pressure is building. But there really needs to be a grassroots movement in communities. And I think with groups like your group and other unions, working with organizations like Council of Canadians, we can put the political pressure where it's absolutely essential. But there are some obstacles. But I think those obstacles can be overcome. And we need to force the politicians in the upcoming campaign, 2019, to hold their feet to the fire. The Liberals have promised it a number of times. The NDP has always stood for a national pharmacare program. And I'm not sure where the Conservatives will be, but you can be assured that it will not be for a solid, universal pharmacare program, equally accessible from coast to coast to coast. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, and I wish you good luck in your deliberations today and tomorrow. And I think you're going to be able to discuss this a little further in the next presentation. So thank you very much.
Leo, on behalf of the CCU, I'd like to present Leo with a gift, and the Council of Canadians with a gift. Thank you very much. Very enlightening. I have his presentation, everyone, so we have it.
Good.
Thanks again.
Okay.
And
good.
Join us for lunch.
Okay, I will. I'll stay and listen to the next presentation.
We'll break for another 10 minutes while we set up for the next presenter. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you all very much.